Christopher Nolan's new movie, The Odyssey, is trending heavily at the moment after a massive opening weekend. And if you search online, you'll find hundreds of reviews of that movie. Instead of doing that, I thought I'd do something very different. I'm going to make an incredibly tenuous link between the world of the Odyssey and Scunthorpe, a town in the north of England. The world of the Odyssey took place in Mycenaean Greece, and that civilization lasted from round about 1700 BC to 1000 BC. When it ended, it didn't just fade out, it didn't disappear with a whimper. It was as a result of a catastrophe called the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse was in Mycenaean Greece a complete destruction event of the existing civilization. What you had prior to that was citadel states, which were highly sophisticated, highly centrally controlled, and which had a lot of culture, including writing. And this would have included some of the city-states that are mentioned in the Odyssey and the Iliad. At the collapse of the Bronze Age, not only did those citadels disappear, crumble into dust, but writing itself actually disappeared in Greece for several hundred years, and it is sometimes referred to as the Greek Dark Ages. The history of Mycenaean Greece was only really retained through the oral tradition during that Greek Dark Age, and it was once civilization and writing re-emerged in Greece that a lot of these oral traditions were then written down and became the works of art that we now know as the Odyssey, the Iliad, etc. That civilizational collapse that took place and is called the Greek Dark Age basically resulted in a collapse back to subsistence farming. It's almost like the equivalent of us being returned to the Stone Age. It was that severe. Because of the loss of the written word, if Ithaca, the citadel state of Odysseus, if that actually existed, we don't know where it was. We have lots of speculation, but there's no definitive answer to where that city-state of Ithaca was, if indeed it actually existed. The cause of the Bronze Age collapse is still debated. The general consensus seems to be that it was multiple factors coinciding with each other, but that the main trigger was some long-term climate change that led to extended and repeated periods of drought over many, many years, which put lots of stress on local states and, in particular, centralised states. The stress caused by that climate change led to a shortage of resources, and that led to war and competition. There was a group of people called the Sea People that, again, it's not definitive, but a lot of historians believe were essentially displaced people who became raiders in order to survive. As I mentioned earlier, it wasn't just the Mycenaean Greeks whose civilization collapsed. The civilization in Babylon, in Ugarit, I can never say that properly, the Minoan civilization, the Hittite Empire, they were all either completely destroyed or severely damaged. The climate change that is believed to have triggered all this wasn't just a local event in the Mediterranean or Europe, though. It was a worldwide climate change. And if you look to other civilizations, if you look to the Chinese, if you look to the Indian civilizations of the time, if you look to the civilizations of South America, they all were impacted by that climate change, but none of them collapsed in the way that happened in the Eastern Mediterranean. The main factor that led to the collapse of several civilizations within that Eastern Mediterranean was the interdependencies between them. If you look at China, India, South America, there was trade going on there, but they just were not quite as interdependent. Because of the instability caused by climate change, caused by food shortages, lots of societies, when they began to crumble, stopped trading with each other. And essentially, what you had was a breakdown of what in the modern world we would call the supply chain of the metal industry. And that effectively became a domino effect, which led to utter catastrophe for several civilizations. And it's that level of interdependency that is the lesson for the modern world. The breakdown of that ancient supply chain was the primary cause of the utter collapse of those civilizations. Now, in the last 10 years or so, we have seen when there is instability that the supply chain can become very fragile. If during the COVID period, for example, certain European countries, even though they were supposedly in the same trading bloc, started to act very much as independent nation states as far as things like drug supplies were concerned. During the Gulf War that we're seeing at the moment, you see the complete dependency on a very small choke point for many economies around the world. And the overall lesson, if people are ready to take it, is that whilst trade is very good and can make everybody richer, it can make a lot of goods a lot cheaper, there is a limit to that, and beyond that limit, you start to endanger your own society, your own country. And really, countries should have a national capability and a security strategy around certain key aspects of their economy. Food security is an obvious one. Energy security is another obvious one. And going back to the reason for the collapse of the Bronze Age and also to link in Scunthorpe, metal production is also something that is important for national capability and for national security. During previous wars, the Second World War, for example, there was a complete switch to a war economy and armaments. Now, hopefully that's something you never see, but if you don't have a localized steel industry, well then you're incredibly exposed to the influence of other people. An emerging area of potential national sovereign capability is also AI. A few weeks ago, the US government told Anthropic to switch off certain models. They didn't actually tell them to switch them off. They told them not to ship them overseas, but it was so complicated that what Anthropic did was actually basically switch them off until they reached some kind of resolution with the US government. If you had a business outside of America that was dependent on Anthropic agentic AI that used the model that was banned, all of a sudden your business stops working. It's a bit like switching off the electricity or switching off the water. So there's all sorts of areas in which I think you do need to at least consider having a national capability that is related to your own security. The security, not just in the physical sense, but economic security as well. And that brings us full circle back to Scunthorpe. Last week, the British government formally nationalised the last major steelworks in the UK, which happens to be in Scunthorpe, and it's heavily loss making. So, from a purely practical point of view, you probably should just let it shut down. And the sacrifice is those 2,700 local jobs. But there is a national interest, and that national interest is separate to profitability. And that's the limit of globalization, certainly from my perspective. Globalization is good up to a certain point, but you always need to have one eye on sovereignty and sovereign capability. And the British government, to their credit, have decided that steelmaking is something where we need to retain a capability, and that capability is all about sovereignty and independence, economic independence, as well as physical security. A couple of years ago, there was a trend where you would ask people, mostly men, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And everyone would say, oh, once a month, once a week, every couple of days. I'm one of those guys. The Roman Empire is fascinating, but the Bronze Age collapse actually has many, many more lessons for the modern world than the Roman Empire ever will. And I guess the closing argument is don't be an Ithaca, be a China.